The story begins by humorously recounting the misadventures of generations of John Paul Stecklers in the United States Navy. From Steckler I who bravely yelled "Follow me," men fortunately with no one following to Steckler 4 during the Civil War, each Steckler seems to leave a legacy of accidental ineptitude. The narrative then shifts to the central character, Lieutenant John Paul Steckler 7, who has just been married and is looking forward to a relaxing honeymoon at Lake Wanapawava. However, before the honeymoon can begin, military officers arrive with urgent orders from Admiral Blood. Steckler is whisked off to Washington, D.C., where he learns he is being investigated for the disappearance of the USS Kornblatt, a destroyer escort he supposedly last commanded during World War II. Initially, Steckler believes he is being summoned to receive a medal, but instead, he is accused of losing an entire Navy vessel worth over $5 million. He is bewildered and protests his innocence, claiming he doesn't even know where the Kornblatt could be. The Navy gives him 10 days to locate the missing ship or face serious consequences, possibly affecting future Navy funding and his own career. Steckler, a well-meaning but bumbling officer, is completely overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. His earnest attempts to understand the charges and even offering to pay for the missing ship on a $30/month Navy salary only deepen the comic absurdity of the scene. Assigned to work with the intelligent and composed Ensign Rita Benson from Naval Intelligence, Steckler is initially flustered by her beauty and authority. They begin Operation Snaggle, a quirky and unorthodox approach to retracing the steps of the missing ship. Under hypnosis therapy administered by Benson, Steckler starts to recall the events surrounding the Kornblatt's last known voyage. He describes receiving the ship through a bizarre chain of command after the end of the war, as each officer above him passed responsibility down in haste to get home. Finally, Steckler found himself in command of the Kornblatt. Despite his lack of experience, Steckler attempted to operate the ship and even rallied the crew with unintentionally comic commands. His efforts to run a tight, happy, and sober ship led to chaos. Nonetheless, they left Pearl Harbor aiming for San Diego, but due to Steckler's poor navigation, they went wildly off course. After a series of confusing and misguided commands, they eventually ran aground on an uncharted island that Steckler named Boo Boo Island. Believing the tide would free them, Steckler refused to radio for help and decided to explore the island instead. While on the island, Steckler and a few crew members encountered what appeared to be hostile natives. The situation quickly escalated with Steckler screaming for help. The island sequence ends with Steckler trying to explain to the natives that the war was over, as he is clearly captured or at least surrounded in confusion. Throughout these flashbacks, it's clear Steckler never maliciously lost the Kornblatt, rather, his incompetence and the Navy's chaotic discharges at the war's end led to the accidental stranding of the ship. As Steckler and Benson dig deeper into records and clues, they start piecing together the Kornblatt's fate. Their unlikely partnership and mutual respect develop despite Steckler's continued goofiness and misunderstandings. Back at headquarters, Admiral Blood and other Navy officials grow increasingly anxious, especially with the potential loss of billions in defense appropriations if the ship remains missing. Meanwhile, Steckler's new wife, Prudence, endures their disrupted honeymoon with affection and humor, even helping him comb through Navy files late into the night. Despite repeated interruptions and miscommunication, the newlyweds remain committed and loving, providing a warm subplot to the absurd military crisis. As the investigation narrows, Steckler gradually earns the respect of his peers. His clumsy innocence and heartfelt dedication contrast with the bureaucracy and finger-pointing in Washington. Eventually, through a mix of dumb luck and determined effort, Steckler stumbles on the location of the Kornblatt still grounded on the same remote island, possibly mistaken for a decommissioned vessel or forgotten entirely. Steckler's discovery not only redeems him but saves the Navy from embarrassment and financial scrutiny. While the details of the ship's retrieval are left ambiguous, the emotional payoff is clear. Steckler, despite being a walking disaster, has always had the best intentions and finally proves his worth. He may not be a traditional hero, but through persistence, honesty, and a lot of accidental charm, he salvages the situation. This film tells the chaotic and comedic story of Lieutenant John Paul Steckler 7, a naval officer caught up in a whirlwind of military mix-ups, marital misunderstandings, and misadventures involving a missing destroyer escort ship called the Kornblatt. The story begins with Steckler stranded on a remote island where he attempts to convince a stubborn Japanese Colonel Takahashi and his men that World War II is over despite their disbelief and threats of execution. Eventually, the colonel accepts the war's end and surrenders, declaring himself and his troops prisoners of Steckler, who in turn insists he wants no prisoners, just his ship back. Steckler's problems deepen when he returns to the U.S. and discovers that the Kornblatt has mysteriously vanished without a trace. Although he claims the ship was decommissioned, confusion arises when records show that he later signed it out again in San Diego, a detail he swears happened by accident amid a flurry of paperwork. Now married to Prudence and hoping to start a new life, Steckler finds himself entangled in a military investigation into the disappearance of the Kornblatt led by a suspicious and power-hungry Congressman Mandeville, who believes the case might involve espionage or sabotage. Throughout the investigation, Steckler struggles to explain the increasingly unbelievable series of events surrounding the lost ship. Meanwhile, his new marriage suffers from a lack of alone time, constant interference from his well-meaning but overbearing mother-in-law, and misunderstandings involving Ensign Benson, a female officer working closely with Steckler on the investigation. Their innocent shared train journey back from Florida only fuels Prudence's jealousy when misconstrued as romantic involvement. Steckler and Benson track down Wikinsky, a former shipmate who supposedly brought the Kornblatt into port but whose memory proves frustratingly unreliable. After a chaotic pursuit and several forgetful episodes, Wikinsky finally recalls that the ship was turned over to a Lieutenant JG for use in a gunnery exercise, suggesting it was sunk as target practice. Taking a gamble, Steckler, Admiral Blood, and others investigate the coordinates and ultimately confirm that the Kornblatt lies at the bottom of the sea, sunk during a training operation authorized years earlier. In a final twist, it's revealed that the whole mess was initiated by none other than Congressman Mandeville himself, who had once ordered any available ship be used for gunnery exercises, unwittingly dooming the Kornblatt to its watery grave. With this revelation, the case is closed, the Navy is spared a scandal, and Steckler is vindicated, having found the ship and cleared his name. At last reunited with his wife Prudence, Steckler hopes for some peace but is once again interrupted, this time by Navy personnel delivering a luxurious romantic evening courtesy of the Navy's appreciation for his service and persistence despite endless obstacles. Steckler finally gets his moment, with Prudence suggesting that while the Navy might be full of red tape and confusion, it also looks after its own. This light-hearted military comedy uses rapid-fire dialogue, mistaken identities, and romantic mishaps to weave a story about loyalty, perseverance, and love amid bureaucratic absurdity and post-war chaos. Through every misstep, Steckler remains an unlikely yet enduringly likable hero, stumbling through government hearings, family crises, and naval inquiries with a mix of clumsy charm and honest determination, reminding audiences that sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction. Lieutenant John Paul Steckler 7, a bumbling but well-meaning sailor who inadvertently finds himself at the center of a military investigation after a World War II destroyer escort, the USS Kornblatt, goes missing under his name. The film opens with Steckler stranded on a remote island held by a Japanese officer who refuses to believe the war is over. Steckler attempts to convince the colonel that the war has ended and that he is not a prisoner but instead they are his prisoners. Confusion and comedic misunderstandings ensue as he tries to avoid execution and ultimately convinces the island soldiers to surrender peacefully. Back in the present, Steckler is being interrogated by the Navy for signing out the Kornblatt in San Diego a month after claiming never to have seen it again. He explains that in the chaos of paperwork and decommissioning, he signed anything placed in front of him and that he may even still be paying for a hut in the Aleutians. He insists he should be commended for capturing an entire island single-handedly. An ensign named Benson, assisting with the investigation, becomes both a partner and a source of romantic tension as she is caught between professional duty and growing empathy for Steckler. Meanwhile, Steckler's attempts at married life are constantly interrupted by Navy orders and the unexpected presence of his new mother-in-law, who insists on overseeing their honeymoon. His wife Prudence tries to be patient but is confused and hurt by his frequent disappearances. Steckler's troubles worsen as the congressional investigation led by the antagonistic Congressman Mandeville accuses him of espionage and negligence. Steckler is given one last chance to redeem himself by tracking down the elusive sailor Wikinsky, who supposedly brought the Kornblatt into port. They locate Wikinsky in Florida, who at first can't remember any details but later recalls that the ship was handed off to a Lieutenant JG for use in target practice. They rush back to Washington with this lead just as Mandeville moves the hearing up in a final attempt to destroy Steckler's reputation. Prudence and Wikinsky burst into the hearing with crucial information that Steckler's actions were based on orders connected to a top-secret gunnery operation. Diving records lead the team to the wreckage of the Kornblatt on the ocean floor. Evidence is presented to the committee proving the ship was indeed used for target practice under orders from higher up. In a climactic moment, the Chief of Naval Operations confirms the story and congratulates Steckler for his perseverance. Mandeville is forced to back down to avoid scandal. The Navy's honor is preserved, and appropriations remain intact. The hearing ends in celebration and reconciliation. Steckler is finally reunited with Prudence and they try once again to begin their married life, but the Navy intervenes once more for ceremonial reasons. The film ends with Steckler and Prudence determined to finally enjoy their honeymoon in peace. The plot is a blend of military satire and romantic comedy centered around mistaken identity, lost paperwork, overblown bureaucracy, and the never-ending interruptions of Navy life. If you enjoy watching this video, then subscribe to Angel Recaps for the latest movies explanation.